We need a president for the workers who've lost their jobs, because this administration is selling American workers out when we need to buy American. For the farmers and manufacturers.
I hope everybody's having a fun time watching the DNC and hearing about how much they care about the minority communities, or all the work they've done to help the little guy, or how everything wrong in the world is because of Donald Trump. Basically just rewriting history. I'm having a hard time listening to this. It's a bunch of lies and BS, and we all kind of know it. But it did get my mind going, because both Trump and Biden are notorious liars. But why does Trump get just so much flack for it, and then Biden gets to advertise banners like this that says truth over lies? First off, if you're new to my channel, 5149, welcome. My name is James Lee, and if you've been around for a little while, also welcome. So like I teased, today's Thinking Out Loud session will be an examination of why some lies seem more acceptable and some not. And perhaps more importantly, I'm going to talk about how that plays into who will ultimately win in November. Okay, so I'm going to jump into the lies, but before that, I think it's important to lay out who the base of supporters are for each of the groups. So the centrist Democrats, the Biden supporters, the coalition they've built up, I think, is pretty similar to the Hillary coalition of 2016. So you have the coastal elites, really ultra wealthy people, suburbanites, and the educated middle to upper professional managerial class, the PMCs as they call it. And of course, the minorities they always kind of seem to take for granted. Now, the Trump Republicans, the people who support Trump, I think are very different. More rural, white working class, and typically they have less formal education than their Democratic counterpart. Okay, so I obviously belong more to the first. I grew up in the suburbs, I went to college, got an MBA, so I think I have a pretty good idea of how a Joe Biden Democrat thinks. And through my entire experience, I know that this group of people, this cohort, some lies are just sort of acceptable. Let me explain what I mean. I think the type of lies that Democrats tell are generally a little bit different than the lies that Trump tells. I thought a lot about this, and Democrats, they usually lie about three major things: their background, some of their accomplishments, and also their ambitions and goals. Okay, so first let's talk about background. So an example of that would be Elizabeth Warren lying and playing up her Native American heritage story, or maybe the story about her getting fired from her job for being pregnant. So these are stories that are either made up or maybe they're embellished to help them seem more like the little guy, to connect with their base. The second thing is lies about accomplishments. Now Biden, he's a perfect example of this. He talks all the time about all the good work that he's done under Obama, how he was there in the room, or how much they helped minorities and immigrants, or how great the recovery after the Great Recession was. But then he conveniently omits things like how the economic recovery only benefited the wealthy and completely destroyed the working and middle class, and then also skips over all those deportations that happened under Obama. The third kind of lie that I think they tell a lot are lies about their ambitions. So I think Kamala Harris is a fantastic example of this if you examine her rhetoric versus her record. So she's always talking about how she wants to help minorities, about how progressive she is, and how she's fighting for the little guy. But all she really wants to do is gain power. That's really all it is. So these type of lies have been conditioned to be perfectly acceptable to the vast majority of the Democratic educated PMC base. It's just something that you have to do to get to where you want to go. To further illustrate this, I'm going to use a job application as an example. So in a job application, you're typically supposed to talk about your background, and oftentimes you're encouraged to tell some sort of story that you overcame a struggle of some sort. Oftentimes these stories are probably based on reality, but oftentimes maybe a little bit of embellishment happening. And then you go on to talk about your accomplishments, maybe at a previous job. Once again, probably based on some truth, but definitely bluffing a little bit about your actual involvement and contribution. So let's say your team made a big sale and you played a small role in it, but then in your job application, you talk about how that sale or that deal essentially happened because of you. And then they'll probably ask you to talk a little bit about why you want this job, your ambitions for the future. And here's where you respond with things like, I want to help people, I want to change the world. Definitely nothing about the money. If all this sounds kind of familiar, well, it should, because according to Monster.com's 2019 State of the Recruiter survey, 85% of recruiters said that candidates exaggerate skills and competencies on their resumes. So putting this all together, this type of lying is oftentimes excused or even thought of as necessary, lies that we just have to tell if we want to get the job. But what's often forgotten is once you do get there, there's more politics. So that becomes a never-ending cycle. And that's why this is not okay for me, because oftentimes good people are rationalized into thinking that this behavior is okay, and then they end up just being corrupted in the process. And you see this all the time in politics with pseudo-progressives like Elizabeth Warren, or maybe even Kamala Harris, if you consider her to be a progressive. So I think that's how you end up with situations where Biden and Kamala's lies are kind of just swept under the rug and forgotten by people who support them. Now, jumping over to Trump's lies, they're a little bit different, or at least a lot of them are, because quite honestly, he lies about pretty much anything and everything. But his lies oftentimes fall in the conspiratorial category. Whether, he's spreading birther lies about Obama and now about Kamala Harris, or about how mail-in ballots are fraudulent, or that China created the coronavirus, or something else kind of crazy and far-fetched. It sounds ridiculous to a lot of people what he's saying, but here's the thing though, a lot of people latch onto these ideas because the government has lied to the public a bunch of times in the past. You can talk about the Vietnam War, or the fact that there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, the use of torture in interrogation, the war in Afghanistan, honestly too many to name. So however crazy you think he might sound, it's all rooted in a history of the government lying to us. So people are naturally drawn to these ideas. Just look at the number of conspiracy theory podcasts there are. Literally, it's a huge niche in and of itself. There is a conspiracy theory podcast about anything and everything. Now, the media, the wealthy elites, the PMC, they are appalled by some of the things that Trump says. There's always this outcry that Trump's lies are extremely dangerous because a lot of them undermine the legitimacy of the government, which is 100% true. They do. But a lot of times, though, the lies are based on something that could be true. Because if you look at the reality, which is the government has a proven history of lying to the public and covering things up, you can start to understand why he's popular. And then when they talk about Trump's lies, they can't help themselves by making fun of or looking down upon half this country, or like, how could you be so stupid for falling for those lies? And then they turn around and tell their own lies. Lies that still deeply affect the lives of everyday Americans, but they just play it off and explain it away as just something you gotta do to get the job. Last part of this video, I just wanna jump into how I think this might affect the outcome of the election in November. So you have one side telling lies about how good of a person they are and how they wanna help people and how their work in government has benefited so many people. And then you have another side essentially saying that the government institutions are all phony and fraudulent. If you pair that together with reality and that the working class has been absolutely decimated by neoliberalism, corporatism, and just rampant corruption in government, it's not a stretch to say that the Democratic strategy is a losing one. Times are not good. They haven't been good for a while for a lot of people. The distrust in government is at an all-time high. And instead of focusing on policies that will actually help people, policies that people want, things like Medicare for all, UBI, forgiving the student debt, things like that, the Democrats, they choose the strategy of rhetoric, this restoring the soul of this nation and just selling how great the Obama era was, and that this will all be well when Trump is gone. The problem with this is that I think people can see right through this. They have eyes, they've lived through it. Things were not all that great under the Obama era. Things aren't great now, things weren't great then. I might be wrong about this, but I have to say it. I don't foresee the Democratic strategy working out here. To me, they're setting themselves up for another defeat this November. Obviously, this is going to trigger some people, so happy to start a dialogue with anybody who wants to. Hit me up in the comments. Hit me up on Twitter. Anyway, I'll wrap it up here. Thank you for allowing me to speak my mind, and I appreciate you for watching. Please, if you enjoyed this video, like, share, and subscribe. I'm asking for your help to elevate independent voices, and I really appreciate your support. Once again, my name is James Lee, and as always, I appreciate your time.